Hello everybody and welcome along to this video, which is Mr. Johnson Teaches Paper 1 Section B Question 5. So this is part of the English language revision series of videos that you can see on this playlist that I've put together to try and support you through the different elements that make up English language. So this one of course is focusing on the writing. You're definitely going to need to be ready to pause this video to make notes. I'm going to cover things and going to cover them relatively quickly, so it's up to you to maybe re-watch bits of this. And at the end of it, of course, the key message I would say is practice, practice, practice. Watching this video is a first step towards helping you with your GCSE, but the most important thing you can do is actually have a go yourself and experience it. There's nothing quite like that, and that's very much true for English revision. So let's move on then and have a little look at this. So what does paper 1 look like again? Because this question is part of paper 1. Well, the outside of the paper looks very much like that, but on the inside you will find one source for this one. So this is the one where you have a piece of creative reading, what you might call a story if you were trying to be simple about it. And in the first 15 minutes of this exam, that's where you're going to spend time reading and highlighting that source, and then following that, section A, you're answering questions about that source. So as you will have seen there, and those are all videos that you'll find on this channel going through how to answer the different questions. And then this is what we're going to focus on in a second, looking at question 5, which is writing in response to a picture or a task as well, either. So let's have a little look at actually how that looks. A question 5 will look something like this then. That's a picture I've chosen, otherwise the layout is very similar for an AQA paper. So first thing to draw your attention to at the top there is underlining the 45 minutes. That's one of the big things. You really do need to give yourself time to be able to do this question well. So if you spend too much time on section A and trying to answer the questions beyond the time that you've been told to, then you're basically going to start running out of time for this. And although 45 minutes doesn't sound that different to 40 minutes, that 5 minutes really can make all the difference, or that 10 minutes. And sometimes I see students leaving themselves with like 20 minutes to go and it's just not enough time. So really make sure you're on it when it comes to your timings. And then the paper's laid out like this. So generally you'll get a little task saying something like your school, it's asking students to submit some work for maybe a competition or something for a newspaper. And then they'll give you a choice of tasks. You choose either or. So above the picture then it says either write a story about a dramatic experience suggested by this picture, or, as it says circled down there, or you could describe a terrifying day. Both of those are worth the same number of marks. Sometimes my classes say, can we combine the two? The answer is yes, absolutely. Ultimately, one of them normally ends up being a descriptive task and one ends up being a bit more of a narrative, but this really is looking for you to include description and narrative. When writers sit down to create books and stories, they don't go, oh, am I going to write a piece of narrative or a piece of description? It ends up being both, so you really are amalgamating them. So long as your writing has some sort of connection to the task that you've chosen, that's fine. So how does that break down, that 45 minutes? Well, absolutely spend 5 minutes planning, and we're going to look at that in a bit more detail in a minute. That would give you 35 minutes of writing, 5 minutes of checking. That's the bit that lots of students just bin off and think, no, won't do that, I'm just going to keep writing. If you are able to spend 5 minutes properly reading your work, listening to the way you've maybe missed a word, used the wrong word, misspelt a word, repeated yourself, that will make all the difference to the quality of your work. So it isn't just about trying to write as much as humanly possible. Actually spending 5 minutes will make an enormous difference. And if I can draw your attention down to the bottom right then, so you're given 24 marks for content and organisation, 16 for technical accuracy. If I simplify that down, that's 24 marks maybe for the ideas in your piece, how you've structured it and put it together, some of the methods that you've managed to include, and also your vocabulary. And the second mark out of 16 is essentially, you could call that spelling, punctuation and grammar, which is your SPAG, almost the accuracy, as it said there, the accuracy of the piece, but also marks are given over for vocabulary there as well. So vocabulary is important. At some point I do intend to do a video where I explore vocabulary. So what can we do then? Well, it comes down to, in a large extent, the picture that you're given. Now, I'm not able to show you any of the former AQA pictures for copyright reasons, but I've drawn out some similar ones here which match the sort of type of picture that have been chosen in the past. So sometimes they can be really, really sort of picturesque. Maybe that one in the bottom middle is not picturesque, but it certainly has given you a lot of drama to write about. However, bottom left, we've had paintings before, paintings of a marketplace perhaps. Top right, a close-up of a face has been used before. The top middle one was a very popular choice a few years ago, and again could be quite moody and quite dramatic to some extent. Top right, again, that one is similar to one that's come up before of somebody sitting on a bus looking out of a window, which maybe seems quite dull and quite boring to some, but actually it's up to you how you create and generate a piece of writing from that, and that's what I'm going to try and support you with in a minute. Bottom right is a picture of my own choosing, but again, they can sometimes be completely varied, so you almost need to be ready for anything, and don't look at something as, oh my god, that's really hard or that's really boring. It's how you approach it. So with that in mind then, let me click onto my next slide. Just imagine that that was the picture that you got then. A dramatic sea, and you've got the storminess, you've got the lighthouse there as well. I've had this before where students literally just describe walking up to the lighthouse, the sea, there's a tsunami coming, it swamps over them, oh my god, it's the end of the world, everybody drowns. They're basically writing the moment. You're not thinking, you're going back to primary school and you're just writing anything that comes into your head. Please, please don't. Planning is really important. Students say, well, I don't know what to do, what to plan. This is a structure I've given my students which generally works for them. So I'm going to break this down properly in a minute, but imagine that these were your paragraphs here. If my clicker will work. Imagine that this was it. We've got like the sound of screaming is my first paragraph. It's a memory you can't get rid of, or a nightmare or something like that. Your second paragraph, you're looking out the window and you see that the weather's really bleak, a bit like your mood and your feelings feel really bleak. You find yourself walking down over cliff edges, not sorry, walking down over is an unfortunate phrase, but you find yourself walking along the cliff tops, almost feeling that horrible feeling that there's this thing pulling you down. It's almost like this feeling inside of you. It's quite a dark idea. Then maybe like through the mist you could see the lighthouse, or through the rain perhaps it's there in the distance. And then finally you've got this screaming echo in your head. Like you started the piece, you end with this idea of this is where all those nightmares began. An incident, something happened here. Now you don't have to say what that incident is. That's almost the mystery of the piece. In some ways you haven't done much storytelling. You've only been hinting and teasing your reader, but that's a much cleverer way other than saying, and this is the place where the murder took place and this is where my whole family died, or something where students just make something up on the spot and it generally ends up being a little bit rubbish. So why does this structure work? Well, firstly because you're using a flashback rather than just writing in the moment. You've got a bit of a switch of perspective. We got some pathetic fallacy by focusing on the weather, and that weather reflecting your mood is a clever method. Then we've got this idea of this is where you can really get descriptive, because so far it hasn't necessarily been particularly descriptive, so you can actually be describing your surroundings. And again, a bit more description in that next paragraph where you finally start using the picture. Notice this is quite clever because I haven't actually used the picture up until my fourth paragraph. And then finally, I end on this circular narrative, bringing it all back to the beginning of my piece. So that's a really clever structure. Now you can adapt this by all means. You might find that actually those middle paragraphs turn out to be more than just one paragraph. It really does come down to you as a writer and how you find it. But overall, as you get into it, if you follow that general structure, you are giving yourself a really good chance of gaining some strong marks in the exam. So again, which of these works best? Well, you're going to want to pause this, the one I just gave you, or the classic primary school one, which is thinking in the moment. I'm going to let you pause that and read to yourself, because the one on the right is simply dreadful, but I promise you, having used a similar picture as this one before in my class, I got lots of the green box ones, and when we practiced and did it again, I got many more of the blue, and the blue box ones just so much higher on the number of marks I was able to give. So let me give you a little bit more detail on this one again. So this is following the same structure I just gave you. I suggest pausing this video at some point if you haven't already and putting down those bold headers. But as I've said, that's how I go about it, and I've put a little bit more detail there alongside those paragraphs. In the bottom right there, I've talked about this idea of a motif. Now, your English teacher may have talked to you about that before, but essentially we're talking about something which repeats throughout the piece. Sometimes having a heartbeat repeat itself every few paragraphs, and then at the end you reveal what was causing that heartbeat, or a dripping sound maybe, and what's causing that is what you reveal at the end. Maybe also it's like a countdown as well. 5, 4, and then you write a few paragraphs, get to the middle, 3, 2, and etc, etc, and you'll basically, whatever you're doing, that repeating motif is leading your reader towards something happening at the end of the piece. So, moving on then, how does that apply then to something which isn't a lighthouse piece? Well, it would be up to you to be able to adapt these. It doesn't work perfectly for every single picture, but you can't plan a single way which is going to work for any picture you ever get given in the exam. So it is up to you to try and make it fit a little bit. But I found that that structure I've given you on the left-hand side there generally has worked in the past for lots of them, even like the bus picture, which is quite a challenging one, or that picture of a close-up of a face and what it is. So all these examples I'm giving relate to the picture, but remember you're given a choice of 2 tasks. I think they'd work equally well for the other task as well, but again, it's going to be up to you to be a little bit clever and try and adapt it as best as you can. Now, ultimately, the thing I need to say here really is it's practice, practice, practice. Watching this video and listening to this is all well and good, but unless you actually try this out and give yourself a decent amount of time and try one of these tasks at home, then you're going to find it very difficult. You can't just produce it in the exam. It does take a bit of practice and commitment from you. You can pause this. This is what the exam mark scheme looks like, and I've just drawn your attention to some of the key bits that you will be given credit for there. For example, vocabulary comes up in that top one and the bottom one. Also, the idea of linguistic devices is there, so trying to build in, like the pathetic fallacy and the repeating motif I've talked about, those would gain you marks. So would structural features. The plan that you've given there in itself is a structural feature, but so is the flashback. And then also the circular narrative. And then basically, I'm not going to read through all of those there, but I draw your attention to a range of punctuation. For many of my students over the years, that's been an area which could definitely be developed and has been maybe a bit of a weakness, is they're using full stops, commas and let's say question marks quite well, but it's those colons, those semicolons and dashes, and you will find a playlist which contains videos of me talking through how to use those types of punctuation. So if you're not sure, make sure you feel certain before walking in there. So finally, to summarise, bullet points. Plan out your work. Definitely follow that structure I've given you, or the one that you've had from your teacher. Aim to include some of that structure. You may not remember it perfectly. That's fine. If you forget bits, adapt it. Not all writing has to follow that same structure, so be ready to adapt it to what fits when you're in your actual assessment. Think about a range of methods, punctuation and vocabulary, as I've said there. The more of those you're able to use, the more enjoyable, skillful your piece is going to be. And above all else I've put there, try and make your writing engaging. Make the examiner or your teacher or whoever this is for want to read your writing. If you're enjoying it, the likelihood is that they're enjoying it. If you're just trying to pull something out of thin air and just trying to make it up on the spot, you're not enjoying yourself, and I can promise you your reader probably won't either. So that's where I'm going to end this one. The key message now is practice, practice, practice. You could even use that one I've pasted on the right hand side there for you. And do check out some of the other videos on this channel, which I talk through language and literature and other elements of English generally. Feel free to subscribe if you found this useful, or share it with a friend and tell them. And above all, I wish you the very best of luck when it comes to any of your exams and assessments in the future. Thanks very much for watching, and goodbye.